The crystalline halls of the Nexus station echoed with chittering laughter as Ambassador Velthara of the Hegemony reviewed the latest human diplomatic proposal. Her four arms gestured dismissively at the holographic document floating before. The assembled delegates, each representing one of the galaxy's major powers. "Look at this absurdity." Velthara's voice resonated through her translator, dripping with contempt. "The humans want to establish a cultural exchange protocol for the disputed Kepler 442 system. They propose sharing scientific research, establishing joint colonies, and," she paused for dramatic effect, "creating a council where each species gets equal representation regardless of military strength." The Vorthon delegate, Krixmol, extended his serpentine neck in what passed for amusement among his kind. Equal representation? Do they not understand that power determines policy? Their little fleet of 12 ships thinks it can negotiate with our armadas? "It gets better," Velthara continued, her crystalline skin shifting to a mocking purple hue. "They want to settle territorial disputes through what they call mediated discussions, rather than the traditional might-makes-right approach. They even suggest that technological advancement should be shared freely among all signatories." The massive Krillian war chief, Braxus Thor, slammed one of his 6 fists against the table, causing several smaller delegates to scatter. "In my culture, we would call this weakness masquerading as wisdom. The humans conquered nothing to earn their seat at this table. They were invited out of pity after their homeworld was threatened by the devourer swarms." Ambassador Cale Thornwick sat quietly at the far end of the circular chamber, his weathered hands folded calmly on the polished surface before him. His gray eyes moved slowly from speaker to speaker, cataloging every gesture, every intonation of mockery. The human delegation consisted of only 3 individuals: himself, xenobiologist Dr. Liara Moss, and trade specialist Commander Rife Castellan, vastly outnumbered by the hundreds of delegates representing dozens of species. The humans propose. "This treaty," Velthara continued, now openly performing for her audience, "because they lack the strength to take what they want. They dress up their weakness in pretty words about mutual benefit and sustainable development." The chamber erupted in various forms of alien laughter, from the hegemony's musical chimes to the Krillians' thunderous roars. Krixmol slithered closer to the human delegations section. "Tell me, Ambassador Thornwick, do your people truly believe that words on a document can compete with plasma cannons and reality shapers? Your species has been in space for barely 3 centuries. We have been conquering systems for millennia." Thornwick finally spoke, his voice carrying easily through the vast chamber without electronic amplification. "We believe that sustainable agreements create more lasting value than temporary conquests. The Kepler 442 system contains resources that could benefit all our peoples for generations if properly managed." "Generations!" Braxus Thor bellowed. "I could reduce your entire fleet to component atoms before your sun sets on whatever backwater. Worlds spawned you. Why should I wait generations when I can take everything now?" "Because," Thornwick replied with unsettling calm, "taking everything now means having nothing forever. But I understand your position. Perhaps we should table this discussion until you've had time to consider the long-term implications." The mockery reached new heights as delegates began openly betting on how quickly the human proposal would be rejected. Some wagered that it wouldn't even receive a formal vote. Others speculated that the humans would withdraw it themselves once they realized how thoroughly they were outmatched. What none of them noticed was how carefully Ambassador Thornwick was listening to every word. 3 standard days later, the galactic community received a transmission that changed everything. Ambassador Thornwick appeared on every diplomatic channel simultaneously, his image broadcast from Earth's primary communications array. "Honored delegates of the Nexus Council," he began, his tone respectful but carrying an underlying current of steel. After careful consideration of your responses to our Kepler 442 proposal, humanity has decided to pursue an alternative approach to securing our interests in the disputed system. In the Hegemony Command Center, Velthara watched with growing unease. Something in the human's demeanor had shifted. Gone was the deferential diplomat who had endured their mockery 3 days prior. This man radiated quiet confidence. "We have decided to invoke Article 47 of the Nexus Charter," Thornwick continued. "The right of historical precedent." Across the galaxy, legal experts began frantically searching their databases. Article 47 was an archaic provision, rarely used because it required extensive documentation and proof of prior claim. Most species considered it a bureaucratic relic from the early days of galactic government. 1,237 years ago, Thornwick's voice filled conference rooms on a dozen worlds. The generation ship New Horizon departed from Earth carrying 40,000 human colonists. Their destination, the Kepler 442 system. The ship's records, which we are now transmitting to all member governments, show that they arrived and established a settlement on the fourth planet. Crixmol's serpentine form coiled with agitation as he accessed the incoming data. "Impossible. We've surveyed that system thoroughly. There are no human settlements, no traces of occupation." "The colony failed after 18 months, Thornwick acknowledged. "The settlers died from a plague that affected their crop yields. However, before succumbing, they performed the ritual of claim seeding according to Section 12 of the Colonial Establishment Protocols. They buried time capsules containing formal territorial claims at precisely measured coordinates across 3 continents." Dr. Liara Moss appeared beside Thornwick in the transmission. "Our archaeological teams have already recovered 17 of these capsules. Each contains genetically verified human DNA, dated artifacts, and formal declarations of territorial sovereignty signed by the colony's elected representatives. The legal framework clearly establishes prior claim to the entire system. The implications struck the assembled powers like a thunderbolt. If the human claim was legitimate, it superseded all subsequent territorial disputes. The system would legally belong to humanity, regardless of current military occupations or resource extraction operations. Braxis's Thor's roar of fury shattered 3 view screens in the Krillian war room. "This is deception, trickery. They knew about this claim when they proposed their pathetic treaty." "Of course we did," Thornwick replied calmly, though he couldn't possibly have heard the Krillian's outburst. "We offered to share the system peacefully through our cultural exchange protocol. That offer has now been withdrawn. Under Article 47, humanity claims exclusive sovereignty over the Kepler 442 system and all its resources." The transmission continued with devastating precision. Commander Castellan provided detailed surveys showing the system's true wealth, not just the rare elements they'd already discovered, but vast deposits of quantum-stable materials essential for faster-than-light travel. The system wasn't just valuable, it was strategically critical. "The human archaeological evidence has been verified by 3 independent firms," Thornwick announced. "The Neutral Arbitration Council has already ruled in our favor. All foreign vessels have 72 hours to evacuate Kepler 442 space or face charges of illegal occupation." Velthara's crystalline skin shifted through a spectrum of distressed colors. The Hegemony had 17 mining platforms in that system, extracting enough resources to fund their expansion for the next century. The Krillians had established a forward military base on the system's largest moon. The Vorthans had claimed 2 entire planets as breeding worlds. All of it would now belong to the species they had mocked for weakness just 3 days earlier. "But surely," Crixmol transmitted on a priority diplomatic channel, his earlier arrogance replaced by desperate negotiation, "we can reach some accommodation. Our peoples have invested significantly in developing those worlds." Thornwick's smile was visible across light years. "As I mentioned before, we believe in sustainable agreements that create lasting value. However, our previous offer for shared development has been withdrawn. We are now prepared to consider new proposals under humanity's terms for humanity's system. The galaxy held its breath as the most powerful civilizations suddenly found themselves begging for scraps from the table they had overturned in their arrogance. The Nexus station transformed into a hive of frantic activity as the galaxy's major powers realized the magnitude of their miscalculation. What had seemed like human weakness was revealing itself as something far more dangerous: patience, coupled with meticulous preparation. In the hegemony's emergency session, Velthara faced the crystalline fury of the High Council, Supreme Chancellor. Orthvex's form blazed with angry crimson fractals as she reviewed the catastrophic intelligence failure. "Explain to me," Orthvex's harmonic voice cut through the chamber like broken glass, "how our extensive surveillance network failed to detect a 1,000-year-old human colony. Our cultural analysis division assured us that humans were too primitive for long-term strategic planning." Velthara's own crystalline matrix flickered with defensive patterns. "The deception was masterful, Your Radiance. They deliberately presented themselves as desperate newcomers while concealing archaeological evidence that predates our own expansion into that sector. Our anthropologists classified them as reactionary negotiators, species that respond to immediate pressure rather than planning centuries ahead. Clearly, our anthropologists were as incompetent as our diplomats," Orthvex snapped. "The humans played us for fools. They offered to share what was already theirs, making us believe we held the stronger position." Meanwhile, in the depths of the Krillian war moon, Braxisithor convened his clan leaders in emergency session. The massive warrior chief's 6 arms gestured furiously at holographic displays showing the Kepler 442 system. "Our forward base controls access to 3 jump routes," growled Sub-Chief Thex Mara. "Without it, our expansion into the Outer Rim stops completely. The humans cannot possibly defend such a vast system with their pathetic fleet." "Fool!" Braxisthor's fist shattered the display. "Did you not listen to their transmission? They have legal standing. If we attack, every member nation of the Nexus Council will be obligated to defend them. We would face not just human ships, but the combined enforcement fleet." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. The Krillians had built their empire through strength and intimidation, but even they couldn't wage war against the entire galactic community. Crixmol faced his own crisis aboard the Vorthon bioship Living Memory. The Serpentine aliens' breeding cycles had been carefully planned around the reproductive-rich environments of Kepler 442's garden worlds. His species faced potential extinction if they couldn't access those planets within the next breeding season. "We must negotiate," hissed Elder Silthes, her ancient coils wrapped around the command chamber's organic supports. "Pride is worthless if the bloodline dies." "Negotiate from what position?" Crixmol's neck extended in distress. 3 days ago, we laughed at their proposal to share the system equally. Now they own it entirely, and we have nothing to offer but our own desperation. Back on Nexus Station, the human delegation maintained a calm exterior while monitoring the panic spreading through their former mockers. Dr. Moss worked with xenobiological databases, analyzing the specific needs of each species to understand their vulnerabilities. Commander Castellan coordinated with Earth's Strategic Command, positioning human vessels to monitor all approaches to the Kepler 442 system. Ambassador Thornwick, however, focused on the most crucial element: timing. He knew that each passing hour increased the pressure on the other powers while strengthening humanity's position. The evacuation deadline created urgency, but he also understood that desperate civilizations could make dangerous decisions. "Ambassador," Commander Castellan reported privately, "we're receiving 17 different communication requests. The hegemony wants a formal audience. The Krillians are offering military alliance terms. The Vorthans are requesting emergency humanitarian considerations for their breeding needs." "And the others?" Minor powers mostly offering to switch sides completely. They want to align with us before we become too powerful to approach. Thornwick nodded thoughtfully. Schedule formal hearings for each major power. 1 hour each, in order of their initial mockery. The hegemony first, then the Krillians, then the Vorthons. Make it clear that we're listening to proposals, not negotiations. They want access to our system. They need to convince us why we should allow it. Dr. Moss looked up from her analysis. Kyle, the biological data suggests the Vorthons genuinely face extinction without access to those breeding worlds. Their mockery was arrogant. But the consequences, I know, Thornwick replied quietly, and that will factor into our decisions. But Liara, remember what they said 3 days ago. They need to understand that actions have consequences, even for species that consider themselves untouchable. As word spread that humanity would hear proposals, the scramble intensified. Each civilization began preparing presentations that would have been unthinkable days earlier. Offers of technology transfer, trade concessions, even formal acknowledgments of human territorial rights in other disputed systems. The species that had dismissed human diplomacy as weakness were about to learn its true strength. The patient cultivation of leverage revealed only when the timing was perfect. The formal hearings began with Velthera's entrance into the human delegation's private conference chamber. The hegemony ambassador's crystalline form had shifted to subdued blue-green hues, diplomatic colors that conveyed respect and serious intent. Gone was the purple mockery of 3 days prior. Ambassador Thornwick, she began, her harmonic voice carefully modulated. The hegemony acknowledges the legitimacy of humanity's claim to the Kepler 442 system. We come seeking accommodation for our existing industrial operations. Thornwick gestured to a chair specifically designed for her crystalline physiology. Please sit. I'm prepared to listen to your proposal. Our 17 mining platforms represent an investment of 12 trillion credits over 15 years, Velthera continued, her form flickering with what humans were learning to recognize as nervous energy. We propose purchasing extraction rights for a period of 50 standard years with payments of 500 billion credits annually. Dr. Moss leaned forward slightly. That's a generous offer financially, but it doesn't address the environmental impact. Your current extraction methods are strip mining entire continents. The long-term damage would be irreversible. We could modify our techniques, Velthera said quickly. Implement conservation protocols, limit extraction to designated zones. The same conservation protocols you refused to discuss when we proposed the Cultural Exchange Treaty? Thornwick's voice remained level, but the point struck home. Velthera's crystalline matrix dimmed. Ambassador, we made an error in judgment. We underestimated both your species' capabilities and your legitimate claim to the system. The hegemony is prepared to make significant concessions to maintain our operations, including the technology transfers you called absurd charity during our previous negotiations. The silence stretched for several uncomfortable moments before Velthera responded. Yes, full access to our crystalline computing matrices, our zero-point energy systems, and our biological adaptation technologies. Thornwick made careful notes, his expression unreadable. I'll consider your proposal. We'll provide our response within 48 hours. The Krillian delegation arrived with significantly more ceremony and tension. Braxus Thor entered flanked by 2 subchiefs, their massive forms barely fitting through the chamber's reinforced doorways. The war chief's approach to diplomacy remained characteristically direct. Humans, he rumbled, his voice requiring no translation, you have played a clever game, but cleverness only delays the inevitable. You cannot hold an entire system with 12 ships. We don't need to, Commander Castellan replied calmly. We only need to maintain legal ownership while the Nexus Council's enforcement protocols do. The rest. Legal ownership, Braxus Thor spat. Laws are words. Words disappear when fleets arrive. Are you threatening to break Nexus Charter obligations? Thornwick asked mildly. Because that would mean war with every member civilization, including your traditional allies. The war chief's expression shifted as he realized the trap. The Krillians had built their reputation on strength, but even they couldn't survive as galactic outcasts. We propose a different arrangement. Joint military administration. Your legal claim, our defensive capabilities. In exchange for shared access to the system's strategic resources. Your people gain protection, ours gain materials for expansion. Dr. Moss consulted her datapad. Your protection would involve establishing permanent military bases throughout the system, essentially occupation disguised as alliance. Security requires strength, Sub-Chief Thex Mara interjected. The Outer Rim contains hostile forces that your people have been fighting for territorial expansion, Thornwick interrupted. You're not offering protection. You're requesting a secure base for your own aggressive campaigns. The meeting continued for another 30 minutes, but the Krillians had little to offer beyond variations on military partnership. Their culture provided few diplomatic tools beyond intimidation, and intimidation was useless against opponents who held legal high ground. The Vorthan delegation presented the most desperate case. Crixmol arrived with Elder Silthes and 3 reproductive specialists, their serpentine forms coiled with anxiety. Honored humans, Elder Silthes began, her ancient voice carrying the weight of genuine desperation. Our species faces extinction without access to the Kepler 442 breeding worlds. The environmental conditions required for our reproductive cycle exist nowhere else within reach of our current territory. Dr. Moss had clearly researched their situation thoroughly. Your species requires specific combinations of atmospheric pressure, magnetic field fluctuations, and mineral concentrations that occur naturally on only 2 worlds in known space. Both are in the Kepler 442 system. Precisely, Crixmol confirmed. We have established breeding colonies there over the past century. Our current generation of eggs requires 18 more months of environmental exposure, or they will never hatch. And yet, Thornwick observed, 3 days ago, you called our proposal for shared development, weakness masquerading as wisdom. You suggested that might makes right, and that humanity should simply accept being conquered. The Vorthan delegation exchanged looks of profound regret. We spoke in ignorance, Elder Silthes admitted. We believed ourselves secure in our strength and failed to recognize wisdom when it was offered freely. What do you propose? Now? Complete technological exchange, Crixmol said immediately. Our bioengineering capabilities, our organic ship-growing techniques, our genetic manipulation technologies. In return, we ask only for continued access to the breeding worlds under human supervision. You're offering to become a client species, Commander Castellan observed. If necessary, Elder Silthes replied with painful honesty. Survival supersedes pride. As the formal hearings concluded, Thornwick reviewed the proposals with his team. Each former mocker now offered what they had previously refused, but the power dynamic had fundamentally shifted. Humanity held all the leverage, and their former tormentors were learning the true cost of their arrogance. Ambassador Thornwick spent the evening in his private quarters aboard Nexus Station, reviewing not just the formal proposals, but years of intelligence gathered about each civilization's true strategic needs. What the other delegates didn't realize was that humanity's patient approach to diplomacy involved far more than archaeological discoveries and legal maneuvering. Commander Castellan entered with the latest intelligence reports. Kale, the situation is developing faster than anticipated. The hegemony is mobilizing additional diplomatic teams. The Krillians are repositioning their fleets in ways that suggest they're considering direct action despite the legal complications. The Vorthans are genuine in their desperation, Thornwick finished. What about the minor powers? 17 civilizations have formally requested alliance meetings. They're offering everything from trade concessions to military support. The galaxy is realizing that the balance of power just shifted significantly. Dr. Moss joined them, carrying her comprehensive analysis of each species' proposals. The interesting pattern is what they're not offering. Each civilization is holding back their most advanced technologies, even in their desperation. They still don't fully understand their position. Thornwick nodded thoughtfully. Because they still think like conquerors rather than partners. They're offering us enough to secure access, but not enough to make genuine cooperation attractive. So, what's our play? Castellan asked. We remind them what they mocked us for proposing in the first place. The next morning, the galactic diplomatic community received another system-wide transmission from Ambassador Thornwick. This time, however, he spoke not from Earth, but from the bridge of the human exploration vessel Persistent Hope, positioned at the edge of the Kepler 442 system. Honored delegates, Thornwick began, humanity has reviewed all proposals regarding access to the Kepler 442 system. We have reached a decision that I believe will surprise many of you. In conference rooms across the galaxy, alien leaders leaned forward with anticipation and dread. We are reopening our original offer for the Cultural Exchange Protocol with modifications based on current circumstances. Velthara's crystalline form blazed with confusion in the Hegemony Command Center. What? But they hold all the leverage now. Why would they return to sharing arrangements? The Kepler 442 system will be administered by the Human Colonial Authority, Thornwick continued. But we are prepared to offer long-term development partnerships to any civilization willing to meet our requirements. The requirements, as they unfolded, were breathtaking in their scope and sophistication. Full technological exchange, not the partial offers submitted during the hearings, but complete access to each civilization's most advanced capabilities. Environmental restoration projects to repair damage from previous extraction operations. Establishment of joint research facilities with shared discoveries freely distributed among all participants. Creation of an interspecies council with genuine power sharing, where decisions required consensus rather than dominance. Additionally, Thornwick announced, any civilization joining the Kepler 442 cooperative will receive preferential status in future human territorial claims. Our archaeological teams have identified potential sites of historical human presence in 17 other systems currently considered unclaimed. The implications struck like seismic shocks across the galaxy. Humanity wasn't just claiming one system. They were positioning themselves as the dominant force in territorial expansion for decades to come. But the masterstroke came in the final provision. Participation in the cooperative requires formal acknowledgement that the mocking of diplomatic overtures, the dismissal of peaceful solutions, and the threat of military force against smaller civilizations constitutes behavior incompatible with civilized governance. All participating civilizations must formally apologize for such conduct and pledge to support diplomatic resolution of future conflicts. Crixmol's serpentine form coiled with something approaching admiration in the Vorthan command chamber. Brilliant. They're not just securing the system, they're rewriting the rules of galactic diplomacy. By forcing us to publicly acknowledge our mistakes, Elder Silthes added, they establish precedent that might cannot simply override right. Future conflicts will reference the Kepler 442 incident as a cautionary tale. In the Krillian War Room, Braxus Thor struggled with concepts foreign to his warrior culture. The humans weren't just defeating their enemies, they were converting them into allies through a combination of legal leverage and strategic generosity. They offer us what we need most, Sub-Chief Thexmara observed, but only if we abandon the methods that made us powerful. No, Braxus Thor replied with growing understanding. They're showing us methods that make power sustainable. A strong empire that stands alone eventually falls. A strong empire with willing allies. He trailed off, contemplating possibilities. that warrior culture conditioning had never allowed him to consider. The deadline for response was set at 1 standard week. As the transmission ended, Thornwick turned to his companions aboard the Persistent Hope. "Think they'll accept?" Dr. Moss asked. Thornwick smiled, watching the distant stars of the Kepler 442 system. They mocked human diplomacy because they thought it was weak. Now they're about to discover its true strength, turning enemies into partners, and partners into something stronger than either could be alone. And if they refuse, then they lose access to the most resource-rich system in their expansion range. Watch us build alliances with their rivals and face the possibility that our archaeological teams might discover even more inconvenient historical claims. The galaxy held its breath as civilizations that had ruled through fear and strength contemplated surrendering to something they had never understood: the patient, persistent power of human diplomacy. The response came sooner than expected. Within 72 hours of humanity's counter-proposal, emergency sessions convened across the galaxy as major civilizations grappled with the choice between pride and survival. The Vorthan response arrived first, transmitted from Elder Silthus herself. Aboard the bioship Living Memory, her ancient voice carried the weight of species preservation over personal dignity. To Ambassador Thornwick and the Human Colonial Authority, the Vorthan Collective formally accepts all terms of the Kepler 442 Cooperative Agreement. We acknowledge our grave error in dismissing diplomatic solutions and mocking the wisdom of peaceful cooperation. We pledge our bioengineering technologies, our organic ship cultivation methods, and our genetic manipulation capabilities to the joint research initiatives. The transmission continued with something unprecedented in Vorthan diplomatic history: a formal apology broadcast across all communication networks. We, the Vorthan Collective, publicly acknowledge that our mockery of human diplomatic overtures was the product of arrogance and short-sighted thinking. We formally apologize to humanity and pledge to support diplomatic resolution of future interspecies conflicts. Dr. Moss, monitoring communications from the Persistent Hope, noted the psychological significance. They're not just accepting terms, they're doing it publicly. This becomes part of their permanent diplomatic record. The hegemony's response took longer, involving heated debates among their crystalline councils. Velthara finally transmitted their decision from the Nexus station itself, her form displaying the deep blue hues of formal ceremony. The hegemony accepts participation in the Kepler 442 Cooperative under the terms specified by humanity. We offer our crystalline computing matrices, our zero-point energy systems, and our matter restructuring technologies for joint development. We also formally acknowledge our diplomatic failures and apologize for our dismissive treatment of human peace proposals. What made the hegemony's acceptance particularly significant was their additional offer. As a gesture of good faith, we propose extending the cooperative model to 3 other disputed systems where hegemony and human interests overlap. We believe the diplomatic framework you have established could prevent future conflicts. Commander Castellan reviewed the incoming data streams. Kale, they're not just accepting, they're actively expanding the model. The hegemony wants to apply this approach to other territorial disputes. Because they've realized something important, Thornwick replied. Cooperation generates more wealth than conquest, especially when it comes with legal certainty and technological exchange. The Krillian response required the most fundamental cultural shift. Braxis Thor's transmission came from the war moon itself, but his tone had evolved from the threatening growls of days past. Humans, the Krillian Empire. He paused, seeming to struggle with unfamiliar concepts. The Krillian Empire has decided to accept your cooperative terms. We offer our military technologies, our fortress-building capabilities, and our defensive systems for joint security operations. The real surprise came in his formal apology. We, the Krillian Empire, acknowledge that strength without wisdom leads to isolation and eventual defeat. We apologize for threatening military action against diplomatic solutions and pledge to support peaceful conflict resolution in future disputes. But Braxis Thor added something that showed remarkable strategic thinking. We also propose that the cooperative establish a joint defense force, using Krillian military expertise combined with the technologies of all member civilizations. True cooperation requires protection from external threats. Dr. Moss looked up from her analysis with amazement. They're thinking systemically now, not just about immediate access to resources, but about long-term strategic stability. The minor Power's responses created an avalanche of alliance requests. 17 civilizations formally applied for cooperative membership, offering their unique capabilities in exchange for the technological and territorial benefits of association with humanity's expanding influence. The most significant response, however, came from an unexpected source, the Neutral Arbitration Council itself. Director Qleth, an ancient being whose species had spent millennia mediating galactic disputes, transmitted a personal message to Ambassador Thornwick. Ambassador, the Council has observed the diplomatic revolution you have initiated. We formally request that the Kepler 442 cooperative model be considered as a template for resolving other territorial disputes throughout the galaxy. Your approach represents the most significant advancement in interspecies relations in over 1,000 years. As acceptances flooded in, Thornwick convened his team for a final strategy session aboard the Persistent Hope. The success had exceeded even their most optimistic projections. "We've achieved something remarkable," Dr. Moss observed. "Not just control of a star system, but a fundamental shift in how galactic diplomacy operates. The key was patience," Commander Castellan added. "We let them reveal their weaknesses through their own arrogance, then offered them strength through cooperation." Thornwick nodded, but his expression remained thoughtful. "The real test comes now. We've gained their agreement, but converting former enemies into genuine partners requires different skills than outmaneuvering them diplomatically." "Any concerns about managing such a diverse cooperative?" Dr. Moss asked. "Only one," Thornwick replied, looking out at the stars of the Kepler 442 system. "We need to make sure we don't become what they used to be, so confident in our methods, that we stop listening to other perspectives. The moment we start thinking we have all the answers is the moment this grand experiment begins to fail." Within days, the first cooperative vessels began arriving in the Kepler 442 system, not as conquerors or desperate supplicants, but as partners in humanity's most ambitious diplomatic achievement, turning mockery into cooperation and enemies into the foundation of a new form of galactic governance. 6 months later, the Kepler 442 system had transformed into something unprecedented in galactic history. Where once competing civilizations had operated separate extraction facilities in suspicious isolation, a truly integrated cooperative now functioned as a model for interspecies collaboration. Ambassador Thornwick stood in the observation deck of the newly constructed cooperative central station, watching vessels from a dozen civilizations work together in the space around the system's fourth planet. Hegemony crystalline ships shared docking berths with Krillian defense cruisers. Vorthon bioships tended orbital gardens alongside human research platforms. The sight would have been unthinkable just months earlier. Dr. Moss joined him at the observation window, carrying the latest progress reports. "The joint research programs are exceeding all projections. The combination of hegemony computing power, Vorthon biological expertise, and human theoretical frameworks has produced 3 breakthrough discoveries in the past month alone. And the territorial expansions? 17 systems have requested cooperative administration using our model. The archaeological teams have confirmed human historical presence in 12 of them, giving us legal standing to establish similar partnerships. We're not just controlling territory, we're creating a new form of galactic governance." Commander Castellan arrived with security updates and strategic assessments. The interesting development is how other civilizations are adapting our approach. The Andromedans and the Core Worlds Alliance have both established their own cooperative agreements modeled on our framework. Diplomatic solutions are becoming fashionable. Any resistance? Some fringe groups still prefer the old ways of conquest and intimidation, but they're finding themselves isolated. The cooperative's economic advantages are too significant to ignore, and our joint defense capabilities have proven remarkably effective. The transformation had not been without challenges. Integrating species with fundamentally different approaches to decision-making, resource allocation, and long-term planning required constant negotiation and adaptation. The humans had found themselves serving not just as system administrators, but as mediators between civilizations learning to work together for the first time. Velthara had evolved into an unexpected ally, her crystalline precision complementing human diplomatic flexibility. Her latest report had proposed expanding the cooperative model to include cultural exchange programs, allowing young members of different species to study with their counterparts and develop the interspecies understanding necessary for long-term cooperation. The Krillians had perhaps undergone the most dramatic cultural shift. Braxus Thor's warriors had become the cooperative's most effective peacekeeping force, but their methods had evolved from intimidation to protection. They now served as guardians of diplomatic processes rather than obstacles to them. The Vorthans had contributed more than anyone anticipated. Their biological expertise had solved ecological problems on multiple worlds, and their reproductive cycles had stabilized with access to the Kepler 442 breeding worlds. Elder Silthes had become one of the cooperative's most effective voices for sustainable development. Ambassador, Commander Castellan continued, we've received an interesting proposal from the Galactic Trade Federation. They want to establish the cooperative as the official mediating authority for territorial disputes. Essentially, they're asking us to export our diplomatic model across the galaxy. Thornwick considered the implications. The proposal represented the culmination of everything they had worked toward, but it also carried enormous responsibilities. Dr. Moss pulled up holographic displays showing the economic data. The numbers are compelling. Systems under cooperative. Administrations show average productivity increases of 300% compared to single-species control. Environmental restoration projects have exceeded all targets. Technological advancement rates have tripled due to knowledge sharing. More importantly, she continued, conflict rates in cooperative-administered space have dropped to nearly zero. When civilizations have a stake in maintaining peace, they find diplomatic solutions to problems that would have previously triggered wars. A communication alert interrupted their discussion. The message came from an unexpected source. The Deep. Range Explorers, humanity's most distant archaeological expedition. Ambassador Thornwick, the transmission began. This is Expedition Leader Captain Rhea Valdris reporting from the Outer Spiral. We've discovered something significant, evidence of human presence in the legendary Lost World sector dating back over 2,000 years. The legal implications are substantial. The Lost World sector contains some of the most resource-rich systems in known space, currently claimed by the ancient dominion of Zerath, a civilization that had ruled through fear and technological superiority for over 3 millennia. Thornwick exchanged glances with his team. The discovery represented both an unprecedented opportunity and a potentially catastrophic challenge. The Zerathi were not like the civilizations they had successfully converted to cooperation. They were older, more technologically advanced, and had never shown interest in diplomatic solutions. Captain Valdris, Thornwick responded, secure all evidence and maintain communications silence. We'll need to approach this situation very carefully. As the transmission ended, Dr. Moss voiced what they were all thinking. If we can establish historical precedent in the Lost World sector, we're not just talking about resources. We're talking about challenging the oldest empire in the galaxy. Which means, Commander Castellan added grimly, we'll need allies who are willing to stand with us against a civilization that has never lost a territorial dispute. Thornwick turned back to the observation window, watching the peaceful cooperation of species that had been enemies just months ago. The success of the Kepler 4042 cooperative had given humanity more than territorial control. It had created a network of genuine partnerships based on mutual benefit rather than domination. Then it's time to find out just how strong those partnerships really are, he said quietly. Because what we've built here is about to face its greatest test. The irony was not lost on him. The civilizations that had once mocked human diplomacy as weakness were now humanity's greatest strength. The patient cultivation of genuine cooperation was about to be tested against the oldest form of galactic power, absolute dominion backed by overwhelming force. As alerts began flowing in from across the cooperative network, Thornwick realized that their diplomatic revolution had reached its crucial moment. The species that had learned to work together would now discover whether their unity could stand against an empire that had ruled through isolation and fear for 3,000 years. The Zarathi had never bothered with diplomacy because they had never needed it. They were about to learn why that approach had become not just obsolete, but fatally vulnerable to the new order humanity had created. The next chapter of galactic history was about to begin, and it would determine whether the Age of Conquest was truly ending or merely pausing before its most devastating expression. But as Thornwick watched hegemony crystalline ships working alongside Krillian defense cruisers and Vorthon biovessels, he felt something that the Zarathi had never experienced in their 3 millennia of dominance: the quiet confidence that comes from knowing you do not stand alone. The greatest victory of human diplomacy was not the systems they had claimed or the resources they controlled. It was the transformation of a galaxy that had forgotten how to trust into a community that was learning to hope. And hope, as the Zarathi were about to discover, was the most powerful force of all.